Hello, baby friends. Today we're going to talk about being able to stand on up from a bridge. Whether you can already currently do a waterfall drop back or a drop back into your bridge from standing, you can't quite get back up the same when you came. Or maybe that's not even anything you tried, but you knew that you're in a bridge and for a choreo or for a routine, you'd like to be able to get back up to standing. Today we're going to talk about 4 exercises to help you train the core strength, the glute strength, even the quad strength to help get you up to standing. I'll also show you a sneaky way to fake it till you make it with a slightly easier arm position. So let's get started. First off, we're going to do a variation of camel drop backs to get used to keeping our abs super engaged, glutes engaged, even our quads engaged to help push our hips forward. So what this is going to look like from kneeling, these are not hip width apart. I'm going to start with my arms crossed in front of my chest. I'm going to engage my abs by really pulling my belly button in towards my spine. I'm going to keep that little bit of tension in my abs as I engage my glutes to push my hips forward. I want you to keep those hips pointing forward as you start to arch back. So in this position, our glutes are squeezing, our abs are squeezing. Holding this just for a moment and using your abs to knit them together. Lift your torso back on up to upright. So 2 things I want you to think about here. Outside from the movement. That one's always going to go without strength. But number 1, making sure your hips are pushing forwards the whole time. Don't let that butt fall back towards your heels for this first exercise. I want you to be squeezing your glutes enough and engaging your quads enough to prevent you from falling back. And number 2, I don't want you just to be hinging at the low back. I want you to think about opening your chest towards the ceiling. So we get a little bit more arching through our upper back, not just the low back. So with those 2 things combined, arms across my chest, abs engaged, pushing my hips forward so my thighs are staying vertical. I'm opening my chest up towards the ceiling as I'm arching. And you're welcome to arch back as deeply as you like, as long as those hips don't start to drift towards those heels. Come on back up. You're letting your neck fall back. I want you to keep your neck relaxed until you get back on up to standing. Then tuck your chin as the last thing. So go ahead, do any number between 6 and 12 of these with your hands crossed on top of your chest. And we'll keep going. If hands crossed on your chest is a bit challenging, modification for this exercise is doing this with your hands on your hips. If you have to modify this exercise, you may not have the core control to be able to do a full stand up from your bridge. This is still really great conditioning to do to help build up that strength. So for the modification, I'm going to take my hands to the back of my hip bones. I like fingers on the outside of my hips, but really any way you can place your hand that feels comfortable on your wrists. Fine by me. We're still going to engage our abs, pulling that belly button in. Still going to engage our glutes, pushing our hips forwards. But now our hands get to help pushing those hips forwards as I start to open my chest. I've got lots of weight in my hands, so my hands are supporting this back bend as well. We're still going to use our abs to try to lift our torso back on up to upright. The exact same thing as that first exercise, except this one we've got a little bit more hand and our support. Once those camel drop backs are feeling good, now it's time to make them a little bit harder. We're going to add our arms overhead position. This is the position our arms are going to be in, theoretically, while we are floating up from our bridge. The reason this is harder is this makes our whole upper body longer. It's going to feel a lot heavier than when we've got our arms nice and close in towards our torso and our center of gravity is a little bit closer. So for this exercise, we'll be using the wall as a spot. So we're going to start kneeling. I like having my toes the foot is from the wall. You can kind of experiment being farther or closer away. At starting kneeling, knees not hip width apart. I'm going to reach both of my arms up overhead. Engage those abs, pull that belly button in. Engage those glutes, push those hips forwards. As I'm opening my chest and arching back, I'm reaching my hands to the wall. And you're going to reach your hands as low as you comfortably can. And once you've reached as far down without letting your hips fall back, you're welcome to let those hips sink a little deeper. But since this is where I am on the wall, this is kind of where I can comfortably reach my hands. And I'm going to squeeze my glutes, use my abs to lift me back on up to kneeling. So arms reaching up overhead, hips go forwards As I arch back, maybe I can reach my hands a little lower to the wall. Push into those hands. Coming back on up to standing. Make this a little harder. I'm gonna sneak a little bit farther away from the wall. Engage those abs, engage those glutes. Hips go forwards as I start arching back. Now I've got a little space to let my hips fall back so that my hands can come a little lower. Maybe those hands come all the way to the floor. Maybe they come to blocks on the floor if you want a little bit of an in-between. I'm gonna push my feet into the ground, lift on up. Whew. Back to kneeling. Didn't realize how hard that one is to do and talk at the same time. All the more reason to make sure you are breathing while you're doing these exercises. So if those start to feel good, challenge mode is doing them totally away from the wall, so not using the wall for a spot whatsoever. Gauging those abs, pulling that belly button in, gauging those glutes, sending those hips forwards, arching back as much as you can first, and then we can fall back towards our heels as much as it needs to get those hands to the floor. Pushing into those fingertips, pushing the feet into the floor as we lift back on up to standing. You want super challenge mode, we can start elevating the knees with blocks. So starting really with one block, going higher than a single block, it starts to get a little bit wonky. But I'm gonna have one block under each knee. Toes can be pointed or flexed, whichever feels more comfortable. But by lifting our knees farther away, now our arms have a little bit farther to reach. So starting arms overhead, I'm gonna engage my glutes, engage those abs as I'm arching back, bringing my fingers down to touch the floor. Lifting back on up. So this one's a lot closer to what it'll feel like in our actual bridge, because we're starting a little bit higher. Now to get used to the whole range of motion of lifting up for our bridge, we're gonna walk our hands up the wall. If you've been working on being able to do a drop back from standing, you might have come down the wall, you might have come up before, so this may be a familiar exercise. So what this is gonna look like, I'm gonna push up into my bridge, nice and close to the wall. This one might be a little easier with your feet closer to the wall, so walk your feet in as close as you can. I'm gonna take one hand to the wall, then the other hand. See if I can walk myself up. As I'm walking up, I'm squeezing those glutes, pulling that belly button in. If you would like a challenge, you can walk your hands back down with control, the same way you came up, or you can just sit on your butt and push back up into your bridge. But our goal is gonna be to walk up the wall about 5 times. So pushing into those feet, squeezing those glutes as I bring one hand to the wall. The other, abs helping lift my torso the rest of the way as I lift. If you're having a hard time getting the stability to push those hands into the wall to start with, we can start with our hands a little bit higher on 2 yoga blocks. So I'm gonna have 4 yoga blocks, 2 under each hand, leaning into the wall so they don't slide. Pushing up into my bridge, walking my hands on top of my blocks. So now I'm already partway up the wall. Easier peasier. I'm gonna take one hand to the wall, then that other. Climb the rest of the way up. So that's a nice modification if you're struggling with getting your hands to walk up from your bridge. So now that we've warmed up abs, quads, glutes, back, everything is used to engaging. Let's start taking this into some bridge rocks and get used to sending our momentum a little bit forwards and backwards. So I'm gonna press into my bridge. And first we're just gonna do a couple rocks to see what they feel like. I'm gonna push into my feet, sending more weight into my hands. Then I'm gonna push into my hands, sending more weight into my feet. Back and forth. So these first ones may not be very dramatic. That's okay. But if we want to add a little bit more springiness to these, I'm gonna walk my feet in a little closer to my hands. I don't want you to be in your narrowest bridge humanly possible, where it feels like you're having a little bit challenge balancing. Try to aim for like 75% of your maximum bridge. That way we already feel a little bit of a springiness in our limbs. And try those rocks again, forwards and backwards, and maybe you can even come up onto your fingertips. Maybe you can even lift your hands up for a hot second. Or if you're feeling very brave, we can try lifting all the way up. you want a slightly easier version to try those rocks coming up onto standing, we can totally cheat the bridge. Do it with the shittiest leg form that you possibly can. So normally, when we are in our bridge, we have our feet bat hip width apart, trying to fight lots of external rotation in those hips. So keeping toes and knees more or less pointing towards the edge of the mat. That's gonna make it really hard to stand up from this bridge. Instead, we're gonna take more of what limbo dancers do with their legs. We're gonna take our feet super wide, awkwardly wide, toes pointing out to the sides. Try those rocks. Again, you might notice it's a lot easier to bend your knees, bending forward towards the end of your mat. You can recruit those glutes a lot sooner. So if we're trying to rock up to standing, this might be an easier way for you to work on those rocks. Finally, if those rock ups are still not feeling good, we can just fake the whole thing. And instead of doing this in our traditional bridge with our arms overhead, we can do it from a tabletop bridge. It's way easier for our shoulders. So what that looks like, we're gonna be starting in a tabletop with one arm on the floor, other arm reaching up. I'm gonna have my feet wide, sort of angled out to the side, really getting used to that limbo. Using my glutes, trying to press off of that bottom hip as I reach my top arm up and standing. This is also one you can do with a block under your hand if you're trying to get used to the glute push to lift your hips on up. So to find that three-legged tabletop from our regular bridge, if you're in your regular bridge and you want to come to that tabletop to come to standing, I'm going to take my hands as close to my feet as I can because that's going to make the push-up easier. Whichever arm is going to be my base, I'm going to rotate those fingers towards the inside of my mat, lift my other arm up. I'm going to drop my hips for a moment. So now you can see my base arm is more in a camel stretch position as opposed to the straight overhead shoulder reach. The shoulder is now closed. It's much easier to push on that hand. So from here, I'll see if I can do a couple rocks, squeeze in my glutes, let my knees drift forwards, come on up to standing. And that's all there is to it.